So it seems like we've reached a natural transition point to talking about the post-2026 operations. And we're going to begin this conversation this afternoon with Mr. Cameron from the Bureau of Reclamation, and we'll continue that conversation tomorrow morning. So please come back, and I think all of our panelists will be talking about this topic. We'll have some very interesting information to share, and I think we're all aware that we're on the verge of the federal government making a decision for how we're going to operate the system moving forward. So I'm very grateful that Mr. Cameron, the acting commissioner for the Bureau of Reclamation, has taken time out of his busy schedule to visit with us. I understand he was on a whirlwind tour across the West over the last several days and agreed to stop here for one final presentation before he goes home to get some rest. So Mr. Cameron, we're all looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I would invite you to adopt your own rock and roll persona if you so choose. Given where we are right now, perhaps I could recommend the boss. And so with that, I will invite you to share some remarks.
Actually, I think my aspiration is to live as long as Mick Jagger. But we'll see how that plays out. Hopefully I'll get out of here in one piece this afternoon. So I appreciate Ann's expression of confidence of how I'm going to give you all sorts of wisdom. I'm reminded of Ronald Reagan's joke that the most feared words in the English language are, "I'm from Washington and I'm here to help you." Having said that, I find myself from Washington and I'm at least trying to help you, as is the entire administration. So seriously, I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you. My staff gave me probably 35 minutes of a presentation here. I'm going to save us both the pain of my speaking it and your hearing all of it, because I do want to have opportunity for Q&A, with a caveat that I hope you give me some grace if I don't have intelligent answers for all your intelligent questions, but we'll give it a shot. Very much pleased to be here, as I was last year as well. So a lot's happened in the last year. One of the things that hasn't happened is Secretary Burgum's commitment to try to help 7 states solve your and our collective challenges on the Colorado. So as I mentioned last year, shortly after he was confirmed, I met with him and briefed him on the Colorado River. And he gave me 4 principles. The first was he really, really, really wanted to have a 7-state deal and wanted the Bureau to work as hard as possible to achieve a 2nd-state deal. Related to that, he wanted his political leadership, which at that point was pretty much exclusively myself, more recently my boss, Assistant Secretary Travnik, to be heavily, constantly, and repeatedly involved with the 7 states to try to get to a 7-state deal. Thirdly, he said, don't forget that I have Indian trust responsibilities. So as you're talking with those 7 states about what the future of the basin might look like, remember that we have to protect the interests of the tribes to the extent that we possibly can. And finally, he said, look, if there's no 7-state deal, then I'll do what I have to do as water master of the lower basin and exercising the authorities that I have in the upper basin. And I realize there's some difference of opinion about the extent of the Secretary's authorities in the upper basin. In any case, starting in early April, about every other week, I was spending a day or two out west with my 7 new best friends and their entourage, or entourages, trying to figure out a path forward. I wish I could tell you that we had a solution. As you are obviously very painfully aware, we don't have a solution, at least not at this point. Sadly, the predicament that we have here in the Colorado is not unique to the Colorado Basin. And talking to our regional director in the Pacific Northwest, there are a bunch of watersheds in the Columbia Basin that are not particularly good shape. There are systems in Montana and the Dakotas that are not in good shape. So we're dealing if not a national problem, at least a widely dispersed drought situation that we have to deal with. We've talked about the hydrology earlier today. Snowpack is at very, very low levels. The reservoir levels in Powell and Meade are very low. At Powell in particular, they're almost scarily low. So that compounds the challenges that we have to deal with. Reclamation has had to make some tough and perhaps unprecedented decisions this year based upon what's going on with the elevations at Powell and Meade. So as I suspect you all know, we made a decision using the drought contingency plan and the DROA associated with that to send between 660,000 acre feet and 1 million acre feet of water from the crisp upper initial units, which really means Flaming Gorge, given the situation at the other crisp upper initial units, down into the direction of Lake Powell. And we've cut the amount of water that we'd be sending from Lake Powell to Meade by 1.5 million acre feet. So I think we've succeeded in making everybody unhappy and everybody mad, which maybe means we're doing the right thing. In terms of Lake Powell, not surprisingly, we're really trying to avoid that critical elevation of 3,500 feet or 3,490. Maintaining elevation of 3,500 feet is essential for protecting operational reliability and redundancy for water delivery and flexibility for power plant operations as the reservoir levels approach the critical elevation of 3,490. So as my 7 best friends have repeatedly reminded me, energy is not particularly important. We're worried about water. But there's a connection between energy and water. If you look at the growth of data centers across the West, some of them, if not all of them, use water. And those data centers absorb between 60 and 80 megawatts of energy each. And it would be nice if we had more rather than less hydroelectric energy to help keep those data centers humming. So water and energy are without a doubt tightly connected. In terms of our post-2026 operations, the department and the basin states have been in continuous discussions to develop a consensus-based proposal. You all know that. The department has been heavily engaged. We've been facilitating discussions. We've been making suggestions. We've been very much in the listening mode, but active listening. So we've tried to understand where the 7 states are coming from. We have tried to figure out what compromise solutions might be. And in fact, we have floated three times of solutions that we thought represented something that the 7 states could agree on. Turns out we were wrong, but we have certainly made the effort. We have been active. We have not been passive. And along the way, of course, we've been providing our technical expertise, and we have reminded my 7 best friends that there are deadlines, actually, that we have to meet. I mean, we do have a Lake Powell water year starting up in October. We've got a Lake Meade water year in December. So it's not like we can just keep on talking indefinitely. The department continues to strongly prefer a 7-state consensus, as that would certainly provide the most certainty, predictability, and durability for future operations. There's no doubt about that. Secretary Burgum has gotten personally involved. In January, I think it was, he hosted the 7 governors, actually 6+1 because Governor Newsom had an unavoidable conflict, but sent his Secretary for Natural Resources. He hosted those 7 states in his office for a couple of hours to talk about what could he do to help them get to a common agreement. And more recently, he had a Teams meeting with all 7 of them to make the same offer, ask the same questions. I'm told that the Secretary of the Interior has never had 7 governors in his office simultaneously to talk about anything. So the fact that he has tried to wrangle his former gubernatorial colleagues twice, I think indicates how seriously Secretary Burgum takes what's happening in the Colorado River. We are rapidly approaching the new water year on October 1, and so time is short for the 7 basin states to reach consensus on a new operating framework. Frankly, at this point, we are interested in any multi-state agreement that would provide anybody, anywhere, a little bit more certainty and pose a little bit less risk. The draft EIS was published in early January. The public comment period is over. We did, as part of the EIS, float 5 alternatives, deliberately crafted very broadly, so it was almost inconceivable, at least in our minds, that some 7-state solution could not somehow fall within the boundaries of those 5 alternatives. We got about 18,000 comments, including a little bit less than 800 unique submissions. And as we've been developing our preliminary preferred alternative, we have had frequent conversations, often once or twice a week, with between 3 and 4 or 7 of the 7 basin states, not to mention a whole bunch of Indian tribes, where we've had something of a traveling roadshow in terms of tribal consultation. We've developed an approach, a preferred alternative that we believe is the most effective approach to balance the basin's needs for certainty and stability, given the current unprecedented risks and uncertainty in the basin. The preferred alternative provides a 10-year framework, and we would love to have a 20-year deal or a 30-year deal. But frankly, we haven't even been able to get 7 states to agree on what a 2-year deal would look like. So we're using a 10-year framework that the department would use to issue operational guidelines at 2-year intervals. Given the highly unusual hydrological situation in the basin, and I think the implications for adaptive management from that very bad hydrology, we think it makes sense to take a second look at decision-making every couple of years. This broader framework would include a set of principles over that 10-year period. And oh, by the way, if peace breaks out and we have a 7-state agreement on something a year and a half from now or 4.5 years from now, we're happy to take that agreement and have it supplant this 10-year framework. A fundamental operating principle of the preliminary preferred alternative is to adopt guidelines that result in more hydrology responsive operations than the current guidelines. So we want to pay more attention to what's actually happening in the river and what's happening in terms of the elevation of the reservoirs in the river. We want to manage conservatively during low inflow periods and hopefully be able to transition to recovery as conditions improve across the basin to keep the system stable and resilient. If the basin is unable to reach a long-term consensus over the next decade, the preliminary preferred alternative provides a stable, transparent, and we think adaptable framework for operational decision-making. It establishes a clear process for incorporating consensus-based recommendations as they emerge and build upon the NEPA compliance completed through the post-2026 NEPA process. At the same time, basin-wide long-term consensus certainly is our preferred alternative. Late this summer, in time for the August determination of a 2027 operating conditions, we will adopt both a record of decision setting forth this 10-year framework as our preferred alternative, and we'll adopt operational guidelines to be used in the 2027 and the 2028 operations. You could think of those as the first 2 years of the 10-year framework, if you will. We are still working on operational guidelines for 2027 and 2028. We're having lots of conversations with the 7 states about what that might look like, and getting lots of ideas, not always exactly the same ideas from the 7 states, but the point is we're talking, we're engaging. The Department of Reclamation have collaborated with the states to better understand the various proposals that the lower basin and also the upper basin have shared with us, and offering feedback. Throughout this ongoing process, we've made several modifications suggested by the Department and Reclamation, particularly to the lower basin's proposal for the operations in 2027-28. We're going to be continuing to have conversations with both the upper and lower basin states and the tribes as we move forward and get closer to publishing the final EIS and the record of decision. As I said, expect a final EIS midsummer sometime, and the record of decision shortly thereafter. The timing will enable us to use the information from the August 24-month study. So that's one factor in our timing. On a parallel track, we're having conversations with the Mexicans in terms of developing a new minute through the International Boundary and Water Commission. And I've got to say, things are going pretty well with the Mexicans. I won't delve into too much detail at this point. Clearly, sharing shortage is part of that discussion, a critical part of that discussion. But we're also having conversations about salinity management and how we could move away from the current salinity differential at Imperial Dam to another way of dealing with our obligations to the Mexicans regarding salinity that would give us a bit more operational flexibility. Funding opportunities. As we work with our partners to find solutions for future water operations, Reclamation continues to invest in infrastructure and drought resiliency efforts throughout the West. There are currently a number of funding opportunities that are open and available for people to apply for. Under WaterSmart, we have applied science grants and a drought response, NOFO, closing next month. We have Title 16 reclamation and reuse, desal, and enhancing water resources projects funding opportunities that are open right now. We also have a new funding opportunity for Colorado River Basin tribes under our Native American Affairs Technical Assistance Program. We are hoping that these investments can lead to greater water efficiency throughout the basin. As I said, we're also interested in the energy that gets generated by our hydroelectric facilities in the basin. And along those lines, last month we announced that we're able to free up $52 million from the Hoover Post-Retirement Benefit Fund to put several new Whitehead turbines into Hoover. That'll take a number of years, but we don't see Hoover going up 100 or 200 feet anytime soon. So we think it makes a lot of sense to invest right now in these new Whitehead turbines at Hoover, given the relatively low elevations that we're dealing with at Lake Mead. The Secretary, when he met with the 7 governors back in January, invited them to send him a list of projects that they all agreed to would help the situation in the Colorado River Basin. He said, by the way, I'm expecting some non-federal cost share. Don't expect the federal government to foot the entire bill on whatever projects you come up with. Just a couple of weeks ago, we in fact got a list from the 7 governors, and we're in the process of going through it, trying to figure out which of those projects would generate benefits sooner rather than later, and trying to at least qualitatively understand the acre feet generated or acre feet saved or acre feet conserved per dollar of prospective investment. So we're in the process of doing that. There was some mention earlier of interstate transfers. Yesterday, I was at the Claude Bud Lewis Carlsbad desalination plant that the San Diego County Water Authority manages. And along with several of the people in this room, we signed a memorandum of agreement that we hope will lead to interstate exchanges in the lower basin. San Diego, ironically, has a surplus of water given their successful municipal conservation practices and their desal plant, and they would like to make that water available at a reasonable price to their friends in Arizona or Nevada, or potentially both. So we're hoping that this agreement in principle will lead to a real agreement in fact to facilitate some of these interstate water exchanges in the lower basin, and that over time, that'll be a routine mechanism for California to provide some sustainability, reliability, increased water supply confidence to its fellow lower basin states. We also think that desal will be important in the future, and as will water recycling. So we're really pleased that we were able to sign that MOU tomorrow. Another thing that we're trying to do is to try to make projects happen faster and cheaper as a general principle. So Secretary Burgum signed a Secretary's Order number 3446 a few months ago. And in short, what it does, it directs reclamation to take more consistent, more effective, broader use of the capabilities of our non-federal partners in terms of managing procurements with federal dollars that would benefit their systems, and to actually manage the construction activity follow on to that procurement, those procurement activities. So we think by streamlining procurement and construction management, we can help get more good things happening on the ground cheaper, faster than if the federal government were to do things the traditional way on its own, subject to the bureaucratic torture of the Federal Acquisition Regulation, which if you don't know about, be happy you don't know about it. So we're trying to cut red tape. One of the questions that was mentioned earlier is what can the federal government do to encourage conservation in the upper basin? And the previous panel had a series of really great presentations about what more could be done and what is being done, and so on. So the federal government's solution is bribery. We put $100 million on the table through the UCRC for the 4 upper basin states to show us how they can achieve conservation. And we're defining achieving conservation as figuring out a way to have more water ending up in a crisp initial unit, or for that matter, even a participating unit like Fontenelle that's upstream of a crisp initial unit. So we'll see if anybody bites at that $100 million. I'm really pleased that and aware of Utah's really good activities in conservation. Esteban and I are very much supportive of things that New Mexico has done that were discussed a few minutes ago with the tribe. We think that's a good model, and really happy that the Wyoming legislature has passed a new law And I think our panelists probably offered some suggestions for the Colorado legislature about what it might want to do going forward. So we've got this difficult dance in the federal government. We respect state water law. The notion of preempting state water law is very uncomfortable for us. So we see our role as trying to help the states get themselves together to a point where they can be comfortable, with a 7-state deal. And if we can provide, some funding to facilitate that, especially if it's cost shared, then, we're happy to do that. In addition to that $100 million for the lower basin, we've also put $354 million on the table. I'm sorry, $100 million for the upper basin. We put $354 million on the table for the lower basin, and that's looking very promising. Every indication we're getting is that parties in the lower basin are responding to that, and will find good ways to spend that money, primarily to help Lake Mead. So there's a lot going on. In closing, we'll continue to work closely with our partners and their communities to steward the resources entrusted to all of us. We will work to fulfill our mission with greater operational flexibility, disciplined decision-making, improved efficiency, and a sharper focus on the outcomes that matter to the people of the 17 Western states who are relying on us. There are 40 million people who are looking for us to figure out a way to live together. And I think it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. At the same time, as I mentioned earlier, the Secretary is very conscious of our responsibilities to the tribes, particularly in terms of firming responsibilities, but also potentially some degree of offset in some unspecified way. So that's a distilled version of the excellent long speech my staff gave me, about half of which you've actually heard. And I'm happy to try to answer some questions in whatever time we may have left.
Well, I have to give kudos to your staff, because we were seeing you literally answer questions in real time as they were coming in, so they predicted a lot of the questions. So please forgive me if it feels like I'm asking you a question that you already addressed, but we'll try to get to the meat of some of the questions. There are a few questions in here about timing, and I know that you gave dates, but could you run us through the timing for the expected federal decisions, and one that came in particular is when the operating guidelines for 2027 and 2028 will be released?
So we're working on the record of decision at the same time we're working on the operational guidelines for 2027, 2028. Realistically, we've got to get it done this summer, because the water year starts at Powell, in October. So, I would expect that by the middle of the summer, we'll be publishing the final EIS, and shortly thereafter, the record of decision. The good news, I guess, is that the White House is very interested in what's going on the Colorado. So we'll probably have to brief the White House on the Secretary's record of decision, but before it goes final as well. But the good news is that the senior level of the senior levels of administration care about the Colorado system and what's going on here. So I can't give you exact dates, but I would expect mid to late summer. And as we get closer, we'll try to signal a bit more precision around that.
Thank you. There's also a few questions in here about both operations in this year and the decisions that will be made for the next couple of years. So there are a few questions asking about clarification between 3510 versus 3500 in Lake Powell and which one we're managing for. But there are also a few questions about how reclamation will handle water deliveries if we hit 3,500 this year or next, and also what the reduced releases will mean for Lake Mead and any strategies to address that.
Okay, so we've had extensive internal discussions about, is it 3525, is it 3510, is it 3500, is it 3490? What we're essentially needing to do is to give ourselves enough of a head start so that we can avoid the point where we're losing hydroelectric generation at Powell and have to rely on the river outlet works. We've never had to rely on the river outlet works at really low elevations in Powell. We've tested them, periodically, but our engineers are really concerned that we may be, if we end up having to rely on the river outlet works for ongoing on a regular basis for an extended period of time, that we may actually create some structural problems, inside the dam cavitation. So I'm not an engineer. Don't expect me to explain cavitation in any gory detail. But the point is, we need to think about how much time it would take to get water down from the upper initial units, or how much, or what the timing would be associated with cutting back on the releases from Powell to Mead to try to keep us at the point where we don't have to rely on those river outlet works. So I realize I haven't given you a precise answer, but hopefully I've given you the context that we're grappling with.
Thank you. There's a question here about your perspective on sharing the river as a natural flow percentage, which was, I believe, one of the alternatives analyzed by the Bureau of Reclamation. And there's a specific question about whether 68% is the sweet spot.
Well, what I think the sweet spot in is maybe interesting, but not particularly relevant, because the reality is we couldn't get 7 states to agree on what the sweet spot was. I got to give John Ensminger in Nevada credit for coming up, or at least publicly floating, the idea of a percent of natural flows. It certainly would simplify everyone's life in that the upper basin would basically have to worry about how to live within its percentage, and the lower basin the same, without each basin looking at over the fence, if you will, to see what its sister basin was doing. So there were some really intellectually appealing notions about percent of natural flows. But I frankly don't think there's any value in me telling you what I think the right number should have been or would have been. The reality is the 7 states couldn't get there.
Thanks. Sorry about that. I'm going to pinch hit for a second. An operational question. So this year, absent an agreement for conservation in the lower basin, how does a 6 million acre feet release from Powell, as contemplated, impact Mead? And what strategies are you looking into to think about mitigation of those potential impacts?
So, I don't mean to be glib. The short answer is it's not good, for Mead. There's no doubt about that, obviously. But, there is pain all across the basin in all 7 states. There are people in the upper basin who are not particularly excited about seeing between 660,000 and 1 million acre feet coming out of Flaming Gorge, for instance. And I don't blame them for not being enthusiastic about that. And the reality is that if we are close to 3,500 in January of 2027, notwithstanding what we've done this year, we're going to have to ask ourselves a question again. Okay, Do we cut back on Powell to meet releases again? Do we try to get more water out of the upper initial units again? As I'm sure you all realize, the upper initial units are never gonna, there's not enough water there to solve the problems basin-wide. And it's not like you could send 1 million acres down year after year after year, because the hydrology just isn't gonna give you that. So these are stopgap measures that we're trying to use in a critical, hopefully short-term situation by using the two tools that we really have available to us, the upper initial units operating within our records of decision, as a general principle, and our ability to modify the Powell to meet releases, realizing, as I said earlier, we know we're making everybody upset.
So let's turn to funding for a minute. There's a question about when the Bureau will release the remaining Inflation Reduction Act funds that were allocated for the Colorado River.
Well, I hate to give you all bad news, but there isn't a lot of money left. There just isn't. There are some folks out there who have sort of bought onto the myth that we're sitting on $2 or $3 or $4 billion. I'm sorry to tell you we aren't. It's much less, much less than that. It's south of 100 million at this point. I think what sometimes confuses folks is that it takes us quite a while from the time that a decision is made to proceed with the project to the time that an obligation shows up in our financial management system. We have to negotiate deals or specific terms with the recipients of either our grants or our contracts. And those negotiations can take weeks or more likely months. For the cash that was previously available under the Inflation Reduction Act or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the good news is we've pretty much dispensed the vast majority of that, or targeted the vast majority of that already, and there isn't very much left over.
Thanks. I know that you talked about both the Secretary's priority on trust responsibility to tribal nations and tribal consultation. But could you tell us a little bit more about how the Bureau and the Department of Interior is ensuring that tribal voices are being heard on Colorado River issues?
Talking to them a lot. Basically, we've been going out to reservations, talking to tribes. We've had repeated multi-tribe teams, conversations. So as you all know, the 30 tribes in the basin are in very different positions, right? Some have enacted water rights settlements, some have junior water rights, some have senior water rights. So those 30-odd tribes are in very different situations. And we're trying to deal with each tribe on its own terms. And some tribes would like to have a weekly conversation with us, and some tribes are happy with a touch base once a quarter. And we're trying to be responsive to the needs and the desires that they've expressed.
So there's some questions in here about the upper initial units and who has authority and sort of how they will play in the management framework. Can you help explain to us sort of your thinking on the upper initial units?
Well, the easy answer is we've got records of decision with respect to those upper initial units. And the Secretary most certainly can operate within those records of decision. He also has some emergency authorities that could potentially allow him to operate outside of those records of decision. What an emergency is, I think, is probably in the eyes of the beholder. And frankly, we haven't deliberately taken on, made an effort to answer that question internally, because for the foreseeable future, at least, We think that operating within the bounds of the records of decision on those upper initial units is probably a reasonable path forward. Now, you put 4 or 5 lawyers in a room, you'll probably get 9 answers on how much discretion the secretary has or doesn't have in the upper initial units. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to try to do that.
Thanks. So there's a question in here that looks out a little bit further than that 2-year decision point. And it's asking, what will a stabilized river look like in 2028 or 2030, and what federal actions and investments are needed to achieve that?
So I've said on a number of occasions, I think there are processes underway that will put us in a better place, say 10 years from now. The problem is getting through the next 10 years. So for instance, I'd anticipate that there'll be a raised Bartlett Dam, or a replacement Bartlett Dam in Arizona 10 years from now. The Phoenix recycling plant should be up and running and going strong. I'm anticipating that we will have found a path to at least with federal dollars buying federal water to reliably satisfy at least our tribal firming responsibilities, if not some degree of offset. I hope that we will see regular interstate exchanges of water in the lower basin. I would hope that 10 years from now, and instead of 10,000 or 20,000 acre feet of water from California being provided to some combination of Arizona or Nevada, I would hope that we would be routinely transferring hundreds of thousands of acre feet a year. And I would hope that we'd have a lot more desal in place in California, and that desal water would not only provide more reliability for California municipalities, but potentially provide some surplus water that, again, could be exchanged with Arizona or Nevada. The city of San Diego has about 95% finished a pure water recycling facility. I toured that a couple of days ago. Los Angeles has got a water recycling plant under construction that'll be coming online in a few years. So I think there is an opportunity to take broader advantage of desal water, of recycled water. I think another thing that has to happen, and it's not my business to prescribe how it happens, I think there needs to be in the lower basin, and probably particularly Arizona, the sort of cooperation that between ag and urban areas that California has managed. Now, as we heard earlier, that was California did it because they had to, the QSAs, and it was very painful, and nobody really enjoyed it. But the point is, several years later, it's working. The water districts in Southern California and the urban areas in Southern California have a path forward where they can help each other out. It would be nice if something like that could be replicated in Arizona. Again, not my business to tell Arizona how to manage its water or how to amend its water law, but if California can do it, then I would think Arizona could do it too. So I'd look forward to seeing how that maybe plays out over time. As we all know, 85% of the total consumption of water in the basin is ag. So that tells you ag has got to be part of the solution, in some way. I'm very much encouraged, by the way, at the water recycling activities in the upper basin. Aurora, Denver, Cheyenne, it's happening really all across the upper basin. So the cities seem to be able to buy off on the notion of water conservation, and an okay thing to talk about publicly and politically. But it's still a bit of a challenge at the statewide level, it seems.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to hand it back to Chris or Doug, 'cause I think we're about at time.
Okay.